He moves through the world like a shadow, quiet, observant, and always a step ahead. People who meet him are never quite sure what it is about him that makes them uncomfortable, yet they can't ignore the sense of power and confidence he carries effortlessly. He is calm, composed, and rarely speaks of himself. Despite this, others feel his presence as if it casts a spotlight on their insecurities. They sense something in him they cannot reach, a knowledge, a wisdom, a quiet strength. His intelligence and self-awareness create an air of intimidation, though he never means for it to. He has lived many lives in one. From wealth to poverty, from luxury to hardship, he has seen the highs and lows of human existence. He has called different countries home, and his friends come from every corner of the globe, representing all walks of life. This man understands the world in ways that few can, having experienced both its beauty and its cruelty. He reads people like an open book, sees through their facades, and understands the depths of their insecurities and desires. But despite his ability to see through others, he carries himself with humility, never boasting of his insights. He knows the fine line between awareness and arrogance, and he keeps his understanding of the world private, knowing that exposing it would only alienate him further. There's something about his calmness, his refusal to engage in trivial competitions or dramas, that deeply unsettles people. It's not that he acts superior, but the very nature of his quiet self-assurance makes others feel inferior. They sense that he could destroy them with a word or a glance if he chose to. He doesn't need to prove himself. His presence alone is enough to reveal their own insecurities. And for many, that is unbearable. This is a story of how intelligence and confidence, when they shine too brightly, can provoke jealousy and resentment in those who are insecure. It is a story about a man who lives with the knowledge that others are envious of him, and how, despite his peaceful nature, his light hurts them. The man who lived 1,000 lives. From an early age he knew he was different. His mind worked at a pace that others could not match, and even as a child, he saw the world in ways that confused and intrigued those around him. Growing up, he never stayed in one place for long. His family moved across countries, shifting from wealth to poverty and back again. He saw the world's extremes firsthand, privilege and suffering, power and vulnerability, the dignity of the rich and the quiet strength of the poor. His experiences shaped him into a person with a deep sense of perspective. He learned quickly that people are complex, layered, and often driven by forces they themselves don't understand. Wealth, power, and status meant little to him after witnessing their fleeting nature. What remained constant was human nature, the desires, fears, and insecurities that motivated people from all walks of life. In every new city and country, he made new friends, people from different backgrounds, religions, and social classes. Each friendship gave him new insights into the diversity of the human experience. He learned to see the world through multiple lenses, understanding the world not just from his own perspective, but from the viewpoints of those who lived vastly different lives. This ability to empathize with others, combined with his sharp intellect, gave him an extraordinary sense of judgment. He could predict people's behaviors, anticipate their reactions, and see through their pretenses as easily as he saw the path in front of him. Yet, with this deep understanding came a burden. He could not share his insights with others without sounding arrogant. To tell someone that you can see through them, that you know their fears and insecurities better than they do, is not a conversation that ends well. He learned to keep his thoughts to himself, to act like he was on the same level as those around him, even though he often felt like he was observing life from a higher vantage point. And so, he lived quietly, never showing the full extent of his intelligence. But even in his silence, people sensed there was something about him, something they couldn't quite pin down. This was the beginning of their discomfort with him. It wasn't what he said or did, it was the simple fact that his presence made them feel lesser, and they didn't know why. The quiet intimidation. Despite his calm demeanor and humble nature, people were drawn to him, and not always for the right reasons. At work, in social circles, even within his own family, there were those who felt the need to compete with him. They would challenge his ideas, undermine his achievements, or subtly try to one-up him in conversations. It was never overt, but it was always there, the quiet antagonism of those who were insecure in his presence. But he never engaged. He saw their games for what they were, petty attempts to prove themselves, to diminish him in some way. He knew they were beneath him, not in a way that made him feel superior, but in the sense that their insecurities were a waste of his energy. He had lived through too much, seen too much of the world, to be drawn into their trivial competitions. This only enraged them more. His refusal to play their game was, in itself, an act of defiance. To them, it was as if he was silently judging them, silently asserting his superiority by simply not caring. They didn't understand that his peace came from a place of self-assurance, not arrogance. To those around him, his calmness felt like an accusation. They wanted him to be affected, to feel challenged, to fight back. But he remained unmoved, and that was what drove them to despise him. At social gatherings, they would make sly remarks about his intelligence, trying to bring him down to their level. "Not everyone has traveled the world," they would say, or "we can't all be geniuses." He would smile, deflect the comment with a joke, and move on. But behind their words was a deep-seated envy. They couldn't stand that he didn't need validation from them, that he didn't need to prove his worth. Women too were drawn to him, intrigued by his quiet confidence and mystery, but even this became a source of resentment for other men. They couldn't understand why someone who didn't boast, who didn't flaunt his success, could command so much attention. He didn't compete for women's approval, and yet he received it effortlessly. His very presence was a reminder to others of their own insecurities, and that was a weight they couldn't bear. The insecurity of others. Insecurity is a powerful force, and for those around him, it became the lens through which they viewed their relationship with him. People who should have been his friends, his colleagues, even his family, began to see him as a threat. His intelligence, his success, his calm demeanor, all of these qualities reminded them of their own shortcomings. But instead of addressing their own insecurities, they projected them onto him. The more peaceful and self-assured he became, the more others resented him. His light, which should have been a source of inspiration, became something that hurt them. They couldn't stand the idea that he was content with himself, that he didn't need their approval, that he was, in a sense, beyond their reach. Jealousy and envy began to poison their interactions with him. They would criticize him behind his back, making snide comments about his achievements. They would try to exclude him from conversations, hoping to make him feel left out. But he saw through all of it. He knew that their attempts to bring him down were born out of their own insecurities, their own fear of not being good enough. Yet, he never retaliated. He didn't see the point. Engaging with their pettiness would only validate their insecurities, and he had no desire to lower himself to that level. Instead, he continued to live his life quietly, focused on his own goals, his own growth. He refused to let their jealousy affect him, even as it ate away at them. What they didn't understand was that his peace came from within. He wasn't competing with them because he didn't need to. He had already won the only competition that mattered, the one with himself. His self-confidence wasn't based on external validation, but on his own sense of purpose and achievement, and that was something they could never take away from him. The turning point. But there comes a time when jealousy and envy reach a tipping point. When people can no longer tolerate the presence of someone who makes them feel inferior, they seek to destroy what they cannot have. And so, the man began to notice that the people around him were no longer simply competing with him. They were trying to bring him down. At work, colleagues would try to undermine his success, taking credit for his ideas or spreading rumors to discredit him. In social circles, so-called friends would attempt to isolate him, turning others against him. Even within his own family, there were those who resented his accomplishments and tried to make him feel guilty for his success. But despite their efforts, he remained calm. He knew that their actions were a reflection of their own insecurities, not a judgment of his worth. He had learned long ago that people project their fears onto those they see as a threat, and he had no intention of giving them the satisfaction of seeing him react. Instead, he distanced himself from those who sought to bring him down. He chose to focus on the people who valued him for who he was, not for what he could offer them. He surrounded himself with those who were secure enough in themselves to appreciate his intelligence, his success, and his quiet strength. And in doing so, he found peace. he realized that the jealousy and envy of others were not his burden to bear. He could not change the way they felt about him, nor could he make them see that their insecurities were their own. All he could do was continue to live his life according to his own truth, standing steady in the knowledge that he was enough, just as he was. The power of self-assurance. In the end, the man understood that the only power anyone has over you is the power you give them. The jealousy and envy of others could only affect him if he allowed it to. And so, he chose not to. He chose to rise above the pettiness, the competition, the need for validation. He chose to live his life with integrity, knowing that his worth was not determined by the opinions of others. He realized that his intelligence, his success, his self-confidence, these were gifts not just to himself but to those around him. And while some may have been threatened by his light, others were inspired by it. Those who were secure in themselves saw him for who he truly was, someone who had lived 1,000 lives, who had experienced the world in ways few others had, and who had come out the other side stronger and more self-assured. And so he continued to move through the world like a shadow, quiet, observant, and always a step ahead. But now, he did so with the knowledge that his light, while it may hurt some, was also a source of inspiration for others. And that was enough. As he stood at the edge of yet another chapter in his life, he looked back on all the experiences that had shaped him. The jealousy, the envy, the subtle antagonism from those around him, they were no longer obstacles, but signposts on the journey to deeper self-understanding. He knew now that these feelings from others were not a reflection of his character, but of their struggles with themselves. And while their actions could have weighed him down, he chose instead to rise above them, untouchable by the insecurities that plagued their hearts. He realized that true power did not come from engaging in the games others tried to pull him into. His power came from the quiet strength he had nurtured within, his ability to stand firm in who he was without needing validation from anyone else. The world was full of people who would try to diminish his light, but he understood that they could only succeed if he allowed them to. His intelligence, his beauty, his calm demeanor, all of these qualities were his to own. And while they may provoke envy in some, they also inspired admiration and respect in others. Those who mattered, those who could see past their own insecurities, valued him for who he truly was. They saw the depth of his experiences, the wisdom in his silence, and the strength in his humility. In the end, he learned that the greatest victory was not in defeating others, but in mastering himself. The world could throw its jealousies, its competitions, and its insecurities at him, but none of it could touch the peace he had found within. And so, he moved forward, not in the shadows, but in the light. His light, the one that might hurt some, but would illuminate the path for others. And that, for him, was enough. Thank you for spending time with us through Spookscope today. Feel free to share your knowledge and wisdom in the comment section below, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share it with your friends and family. Until next time, my dear spooker, stay bright.